I know you're out there. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
The Krisanne Hall Show.
Any varmint that crosses that lady's path has met its match. Come
on! Rise and shine, liberty-loving patriots. Welcome to the Krisanne Hall Show. Krisanne Hall here. Find me at KRISANNEHALL.com, where liberty is always over security, principle over party, and truth over your favorite politician. The Constitution is not a political tool. It is the foundation of our constitutional republic. It is the supreme law of the land. It is the basis for the preservation of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And sometimes that means we have to accept things that we don't like. We have to accept speech we don't like. We have to accept the people being able to believe things we don't like. And sometimes it means people even being able to do things we don't like. And that's a sort of conflict for many in our conservative circles, because we have failed to teach the Constitution for so very long. We don't understand that the actions we take to suppress someone else's unwanted speech will be the very mechanisms to suppress our own. Because we say things people don't like. We say things that people find offensive. But when we start wielding a sword to shut down those who offend us, we're actually cutting down our own voices. Case in point. A protest, Valdosta, Georgia, on the campus of Valdosta State University. Some students placed an American flag on the ground and began walking on it. They said that they were doing this because they felt as if the government had begun to enslave them again, and that they did not respect the flag anymore because of the government's forced slavery. This is what we call freedom of speech. This is also a peaceable assembly in which these people are attempting to petition the government for a redress of their grievances. And yet, there is a petition going on to get Valdosta State University to shut down this speech by a conservative group, not by your, progressives that want to normally shut down speech. And we complain when they want to shut down the speech of Mr. Robertson, Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty. We complain when they want to shut down the speech from other places, but now we want them to shut down the speech on Valdosta State University because we don't like what's being said. That is hypocrisy. The First Amendment is not there to protect popular speech. Popular speech needs no protection. It is the unpopular speech, it is the offensive speech that needs protection. And even the Supreme Court has made those statements. In Texas v. Johnson, a case from 1989, the Supreme Court stated, a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. In 1992, the Supreme Court recognized that even hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. Why? Because hate is a subjective term, isn't it? It's based on what you think. It's based on how it makes you feel. Offensive is based on how you feel. Disagreeable is based on how you feel. It should not be the standard on whether I can speak or not. Benjamin Franklin said, without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. Are you offended by them walking on the flag? Good, because that is the way this First Amendment is supposed to work. Can you shut them down simply because you do not agree with them, because it offends you? Not if you love liberty, you cannot. That is not how this works. And as a matter of fact, Valdosta State University would be subject to multiple lawsuits if they were to shut them down. Arresting, convicting, punishing protesters who are peacefully assembled where there was no violence or threat of violence on their part is a violation of free speech, free assembly, and freedom of petition. The Supreme Court recognizes this in 1963. Peaceful demonstrators may not be prosecuted for disorderly conduct. Streets and sidewalks are our public forums. Since 1939, says the Supreme Court. Local government must provide police in such numbers as in their professional judgment are required to afford adequate protection to the protesters, says the Supreme Court in 1977. But our freedom of speech goes way back. I would suggest to you it goes back to the creation of man, as it is our inherent right. Being created in the image of God, we have inherited the same freedom God has. We are free to speak. We are free to believe. We are free to act upon our conscience as long as those things do not prevent the liberty of others. And walking on a flag and being dissatisfied with our government is not interfering with your liberty in any way, shape, or form. And as a matter of fact, the exercise of that liberty is actually preserving your liberty. But when you want to shut that down, when you actively petition to shut that down, then you're simply admitting that speech should only be allowed when it is approved by the majority. And it may be great that majority is you today, but who will be the majority tomorrow? When the majority is not you, are you going to be satisfied with your speech being censored, with being approved or disapproved? This is not a power we want in the hands of government. We do not want the government walking around and wielding the speech censorship tool based on majority opinion. Jefferson said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. We have to be able to, and I'm going to use this word, tolerate things that offend us in order to preserve liberty. I understand the whole argument that the liberals take this position when they like it and not when they don't, but do we diminish ourselves to their level? Do we pick up their argument when it suits us? That doesn't make us any better. We are supposed to be the shining example of what the Constitution really means and what the Constitution stands for and the rights and the liberties of the people that are inherent. We just spent, oh my goodness, when Chris Como showed his ignorance, we spent days arguing that liberty was the inherent possession of men, that God gives us these rights and not government. And now we're going to turn around and tell everybody that government should be able to rein in others' rights? How does that make any sense at all? How is it that we can bring about our own destruction? It's only through ignorance. And that is very, very disturbing. We are the champions of the Constitution, we say. We are those who are defending the liberty. And the crazy thing is, right, this group is walking on the flag, and all the hubbub comes about not because they're walking on the flag, but because Michelle Manhart, an Air Force veteran, tried to take the flag away from them and was arrested. And we're outraged because this woman was trying to shut down their freedom of expression, their freedom of speech, and she was arrested for that. Why? Because she's a veteran. Because she took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States? This petition is crazy. This petition says, how can Michelle Manhart, the veteran who has taken an oath to defend that flag, maybe they're confusing the oath of enlistment with the Pledge of Allegiance. The oath of enlistment says, I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me according to the regulations in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so help me God. There's no mention of an oath of allegiance to a flag. It's to the Constitution of the United States. And as a person who has taken an oath to the Constitution of the United States, her actions to stop someone's freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and their right to petition the government for a redress of their grievances is in violation of that oath. I understand she's offended. But that oath she took would have meant that she had to stand there and defend their actions from anybody who wanted to stop them. You know what the irony of this is? She's a former Air Force veteran who posed with the American flag in the Playboy magazine. So I guess her use of the flag is protected by the First Amendment, but theirs is not. We got to think about this stuff.
Krisanne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Jefferson so wisely penned. And that's why the proper education of our Constitution is so important. We must understand that our right to freedom of speech is one that is given to us by God, and we can never allow government the authority to turn that right into a privilege. And once it becomes a privilege, then we will become ignorant. Because being able to step up and speak out may be the only way someone will hear the truth. And when the government can decide what is truth and what is lie, then you are a slave. When the government can decide what is offensive and what is proper, then you are ignorant. And when the government can tell you when and where and how you can speak, you have no liberty at all. The First Amendment is first on purpose and with a purpose. Because if you have no freedom of speech, there is no freedom of press. If you have no freedom of speech, there is no means by which you peaceably assemble. There is no way for you to petition the government for a redress of your grievances, and there is no way for you to have freedom of conscience. Your ability to believe or not to believe, your ability to choose which religion you wish to practice or don't. See, all of this is hinged together. And when you have all, you have liberty. But when you lose one, you have none. We have a Supreme Court justice in Florida who took a poll and asked the people polled to name all 5 liberties in the First Amendment. He discovered that only 2% of the people polled could name all 5. And that's why we have petitions that believe that it's right to shut people down. The good news is that this petition only has 5,000 supporters. That's the good news. The bad news is it has 5,000 supporters. 5,000 people who believe that they should shut down speech and call themselves conservatives at the same time. You cannot wrap yourself in that flag you wish to protect and destroy the Constitution at the same time. That flag, as the Pledge of Allegiance says, is not what we pledge our allegiance to, by the way. We pledge our allegiance to the republic for which that flag stands. That flag is a symbol of the republic that is based upon the Constitution. The Constitution which declares, does not give us the right, but declares that we have an inalienable right to free speech. Let us broaden our horizons. Let us embrace liberty in all of its discomfort, so that our children will be free to speak in the future. We have to make sure that we are standing for the right things, because that is what this country is built upon. Can you imagine Patrick Henry standing up on March 20th, 1775 in the St. John's Church calling for the overthrow of the government? Can you imagine that happening in a society where the government censors speech? That would never happen. The interesting thing is that in this particular instance, the government would not have supported this. But the people knew their liberty, and they knew their rights, and they were doing it anyway. We have a very important holiday, April 19th, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord. I read something on the History Channel about this date that is absolutely incorrect, and we need to fix that.
I was born for this, and some people wouldn't like that I was different. It never really mattered how hard it would be, cause she filled me with love and the strength to lead. She said, if you were gonna be a flame, then we're gonna light a bonfire. Let it burn, let it burn. Gonna burn something down if you get in our way.
The Krisanne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
The History Channel says of April 19th, 1775, that this is the first battle in our Revolutionary War. This was the beginning of our battle with Great Britain. Simply not true. Simply not true. This was April 19th, 1775. Patrick Henry's speech was March 20th, 1775. January, February, March, April. Okay, so Henry's speech comes almost exactly a month before Lexington and Concord. And in his speech, Patrick Henry says, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's the lamp of experience. I know no way of judging the future but by the past. And judging by the past, I wish to know what there has been in the conduct of the British ministry in the last 10 years to justify those hopes with which gentlemen have been pleased to solace themselves. And the House? Is that an insidious smile with which our petition has been lately received? Trust it not, sir. It will prove a snare to your feet. Suffer not yourselves to be betrayed by a kiss. Listen to this next statement, he says. Ask yourselves how this gracious reception of our petition comports with these warlike preparations which cover our waters and darken our land. Are fleets and armies necessary to a work of love and reconciliation? This is a month prior to Lexington and Concord. He's telling us we have ships, battleships pointing their guns at us. We have battles in the field. They have armies in the fields right now. He says these are the implements of war and subjugation, the last arguments to which kings resort. I ask, gentlemen, sir, what means this martial array if its purpose be not to force us into submission? And then he says, it is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. An entire month before Lexington and Concord, Patrick Henry is giving us an indication that the war has already begun. He said, the next gale sweeps from the north to bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? Already in the field. Why? Because the battles were already raging by the time of Lexington and Concord. I'd like to remind you that the Boston Massacre had already occurred 5 years before Lexington and Concord. If you want to place the first battle, you must place it at the Boston Massacre. And now we have to believe the lies that completely defeat the whole purpose of our actions against our own government. We believe in the Lexington and Concord being the beginning of the battle. We are now taught that the Boston Tea Party was about taxes. But it wasn't about that. It was about so much more. Captain Levi Preston of the Danvers Militia, 91 years old, remembering what happened that day, said, young man, what we meant in going for those redcoats was this. We always had governed ourselves, and we always meant to. They didn't mean we should. This was about self-governance. This was about liberty. It was about their rights as Englishmen to have a right to petition the government, a right to representation. It was not about taxes. By the time we went to Lexington and Concord, the 3% sales tax on the tea had been reduced to 1.5%, and other taxes had been absolutely eliminated. It was about the colonists being denied their right to representation. It was about the government trying to disarm them. The Boston Tea Party sparked a chain of events that would alter the face of the world forever. The British government had to act quickly and decisively to put an end to the uprisings in Boston. And Parliament had passed a new series of acts, one that closed down the Boston port on June of 1774, and 2 additional acts called the Intolerable Acts, and 3 acts together with the Quebec and Quartering Act are all known as the Coercive Acts. And the driving force was the coercive act was another piece of legislation that was passed 5 years prior called the Declaratory Act. We have to realize that this was not about Lexington and Concord. It was not about taxes. The British government had declared itself to be all-powerful and outside any criticism, punishable by death and charges of treason. The government declared itself the power to make and enforce any law, and then wrote laws that gave the government the authority to enforce laws with armed force. In May of 1774, Thomas Gage was appointed the royal governor over Massachusetts. Gage would become very aggressive in the efforts to control the colonists and subdue their seditious behavior. He was going to enforce these laws whether they liked it or not. Now, the first law that Gage passed forbid any town meeting without his approval, and he said he would only legally allow one town meeting per year. And at one point, he sent troops to disband and eliminate a crowd that had gathered in Salem to protest this law. And the people, being outraged at the display of force to shut down their freedom of speech, responded by gathering over 3,000 armed colonists, forcing Gage's men to retreat. That's what an oath to the Constitution says. It says if anybody tries to shut down your speech and your assembly and your right to petition the government of your grievances, the people should show up and defend your right to speak even if they don't like it. Now, Gage was told to get these colonists under control, but Gage did not have the force necessary to control the colonists because the colonists outnumbered Gage and outarmed them too. Gage's solution to this problem was to be on the early morning of September 1st, 1774. He would seize hundreds of barrels of gunpowder from the Charleston powder house. The colonists did not take the confiscation of their arms lightly. By the end of the day, over 20,000 armed colonists aged 16 to 60 began to march from all over the colonies to Boston. The colonists were going to send a message. If the government is going to use the force of government to take their arms and their powder, the colonists are going to interpret this as an act of war and ready themselves. Gage tries to shut down their speech, and they protest. He tries to take their arms, and the people respond in protection of their right to keep and bear arms. And now we have sparked a movement, a fire flashing through the colonies. 5 days after what the colonists called Gage's act of war, the seizing of their arms, their ammunition being confiscated. I'm just trying to show you the parallels here. The militia of Worcester County took over their government from the rule of the king and replaced all the leaders appointed by the king with those selected by them. That same day in Suffolk County, the people gathered together, issued a list of 19 grievances against the government, and then promptly took control of all of the militia away from the government and vowed to have open arms training every single day. The First Continental Congress unanimously endorsed the Suffolk grievances and encouraged all other colonies to send aid to those in Boston. I want you to remember something. Only 5 days have passed since Gage seized their ammunition from one city in Massachusetts. And in response, the colonists stand against the government. Governor Gage ordered his men to conduct warrantless searches on the colonists seizing their arms and ammunition. This is what this was all about. And this particular ignition igniting of liberty in the minds of the colonists and the stand that they took against the government began with Gage shutting down freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, and the right to petition the government for a redress of those grievances, those rights codified for Englishmen since 1215. Gage trying to use the excuse, we just have to keep peace, we just have to keep you safe. And the colonists said, no, that's not yours to choose. It's ours to exercise. And that's why Patrick Henry gave his famous speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." Because we cannot allow the government to shut down speech based on majority opinion. Because then the government will just claim that they're the majority, whether they are or not. And what happens when you're the minority? I want you to understand that our framers were the minority. Only 30% of the population was in favor of declaring independence from Great Britain, and of that 30%, only 30% of those were actively engaged. What would happen if that minority, by our standards, was told they had to shut up for standing against the flag of Great Britain?
My right to tote the weapon of my choice. Don't censor my voice. Hate me if you want, or love me if you can. If the truth is what you want, then you found your man. I ain't backing down, I ain't backing up. If you think like I think, then crack it on up.
I won't back up, I don't back down. I've been raised up to stand my ground. Take my job, but not my guns. Tax my check till I ain't got none, except for the good Lord up above. I answer to no one.
The Krisanne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
So by the time we get to April 19th, 1775, the liberty-minded colonists have already reached the end of their tolerance. They've already heard Patrick Henry give his speech. And we should realize that after Patrick Henry gave his speech on March 20th, 1775, a committee was formed that issued resolutions of the Providential Congress of Virginia. And the resolution read, "Resolved, that a well-regulated militia composed of gentlemen and yeomen is the natural strength and only security of a free government, and that such a militia in this colony would forever render it unnecessary for the mother country to keep among us, for the purpose of our defense, any standing army of mercenary forces, always subversive of the quiet and dangerous to the liberties of the people, and would obviate the pretext of taxing us for their support. Resolved, therefore, that this colony be immediately put into a posture of defense, and that Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee, Robert Carter Nicholas, Benjamin Harris, Lemuel Reddick, George Washington, Adam Stevens, Andrew Lewis, William Christian, Edmund Pendleton, Thomas Jefferson, and Isaac Zane Esquires be a committee to prepare a plan for the embodying, arming, and disciplining such a number of men as may be sufficient for that purpose." This is just after Patrick Henry gives his speech. We are now putting the British government on notice. We are fully capable of defending ourselves, and we don't need your Department of Homeland Security. And since we don't need your Department of Homeland Security because we are able to protect and defend ourselves, we will no longer be paying the taxes necessary to fund your Department of Homeland Security. Gage is not going to stand by, and the king is not going to allow the people to humiliate him in this way. And early in the morning of April 19th, 1775, Gage would send out regiments of British soldiers to Lexington to capture Samuel Adams and John Hancock, and then on to Concord to seize the gunpowder. It was not about taxes. Spies and friends of the colonists leaked the word of Gage's plan to and the colonists were waiting. And the rest, should we say, is the accurate rendition of history. The people of Boston would not technically win this battle, but the die was cast, and the seed of liberty had been sown, and there was no turning back. February 14th, 1776, Thomas Paine would publish Common Sense, and he references this day in April. He says, quote, "No man was a warmer wisher for reconciliation than myself before that fatal 19th of April, 1775. But the moment the event of that day was made known, I rejected the hardened, sullen, tempered Pharaoh of England forever, and disdain the wretch that which the pretended title of father of his people can unfeelingly hear of their slaughter, and composedly sleep with their blood upon his soul." The events of April 19th, 1775 were not the beginning of the battle. They were the announcement that reconciliation with the king was no longer an option, and independence was their only solution. The people knew that the right to keep and bear arms was essential to the preservation of liberty. They knew that if the government could disarm them and could silence their speech, they would be like every other nation in Europe, subjects and slaves. They knew that independence from this tyranny was the only way to ensure liberty. And this is what sparked the revolution that made American colonists freemen in states. Not taxes, but liberty. It's time to be properly educated so liberty can be preserved. God bless. See you tomorrow.
We came to life.